Let me start with a little bit of data, because I bet there's a lot of us data geeks in the room. So Google did a research project that they spent about 5 years on. They were trying to find out why some teams at Google are much more successful than others, and very concretely successful. Deliver on time, write code on time, high quality code, et cetera. They looked at every parameter. Age of people on the team, length of time at Google, salary, background education, couldn't find a common factor. And then they looked at the how. And there it was. The number one factor that all successful teams at Google had in common was psychological safety. Anyone here from Google, by the way? Okay. Just have to check, because then we'll clap. So what is psychological safety? Psychological safety is trusting that when you come to your team, that you can be open about how you feel. And that can be, I'm really excited, or it can be, I'm struggling. You can be open about, as you were talking about, I'm really challenged by this, or I have a crazy idea, guys. Instead of elephants, we should make unicorns. It means that you trust that you can show up to your team and be how you are. Think about that. The number one factor that the most successful teams at Google had in common was psychological safety. And I start with this example because it's just one example, but as an example of what I think of as culture. And I don't know about you, but for most of my career, as part of my intro, I was a VC, I was in tech, I didn't say this out loud, but I thought of culture as kind of the slight thing, the values right on the wall. But what this study shows, and I just wanted to start with that data point, is that culture isn't fluff. I think of culture, and I define culture as the emotional well-being of your team, which is, I think, your greatest unrealized asset. And there's a growing, and it's already a mountain, but there's a growing body of research that shows that when we invest in the emotional health and well-being of our employees, it's not just a nice thing to do because we care, because I know you wouldn't be here if you didn't care about your teams, but it actually has concrete, identifiable, measurable benefits for our business. When employees have improved well-being, they're more productive, they're more creative, they're more collaborative, they work through challenges with more resilience, they take fewer sick days, they spread their well-being to others on the team. I like beautiful slides, and otherwise I would have made this much more crowded with the data. And so the question isn't, is emotional well-being of your team a core part of your culture, and is that something you should focus on? But the question is, how do you think about it? And I want to correct some of the mindsets that I know I used to have about what it means to have good emotional well-being. The first is that, and I want to practice psychological safety right now. This was not planned. So my slides are slightly off because I haven't seen that before. I want to tell you that it's stressing me out. Okay, thank you for just letting me express that. Also, all the backgrounds of the slides you're seeing is my art. I don't usually mention that on stage. And so I care about what they look like. So I just need to practice psychological safety and tell you, it's slightly stressing me out. But once you acknowledge it, it's easier to get through. We'll talk about that. So first of all, emotional well-being and even happiness does not mean that you're positive all the time. It does not mean that your employees are positive all the time. That's the biggest mountain of, excuse me, BS that we've been fed in our culture, that turn the negative into the positive. In fact, true emotional well-being of you as a leader and your team means that you are able to embrace difficult emotions, that you're able to say, as Tom said, this is challenging, this is difficult, that you're able to build that resilience by being open about how you feel. That is part of emotional health. The other really essential way to think about it is emotional health of your team, culture of your team, is not something they feel, it's something that they do. It's a skill. Our happiness, our emotional well-being, the team's culture is a skill. And you can improve it through practice. And I'm doing a roundtable after this, so we're going to dive into a lot of the practices and a lot of the research. I don't have time to go into those now, but the best news about the emotional well-being and culture of your team is that you as a leader have an outsized impact on it. Do you ever feel like you're in a fishbowl and your team just constantly watches what you do? So I've been a CEO for 15 years. That's absolutely how I feel. I have a fully remote team now, and I still feel like they're doing that on Slack. That's the good news, because when you shift your behavior, you can impact the team. But here's the difficult news. Often, when we use our best intentions as leaders, we actually do things that hurt the culture. And I love that, Tom, you truly, I didn't plan to say this, you couldn't have set this up better. You know, as we introduced our Happier at Work program earlier this year, where based on all of this research, we go into companies and we work with teams directly to practice these skills. And before we go in, we always do an interview with the leaders. And so a couple months ago, we were doing this program for a large tech company you would all know, so I'm gonna leave the names out of this, and I get on the phone with the CEO, and I ask him, well, how do you feel about your team culture? He said, great, fantastic. I said, can you tell me your number one value? What's your mission for the team? And he says, winning. I just want them to be winning. And then he said a sentence that I couldn't believe was real. He said, so can you just come in here and just make them really happy so they'll just pipe down and do their job so we can win? He was really excited about his culture. It was a culture of winning. Then we do an anonymous survey, and we ask a lot of open questions. And I've never seen such distressed, overwhelmed, unhappy team members than on this team of winning. So again, the reason why do I say this? Because as leaders, everyone's watching us in our fishbowl. We often think we know how our team is feeling, and we may not. And we often may want to do things for our team as leaders with our best intentions that may actually be hurting our team. And I learned this in a very, very, very painful personal lesson. So I've been a leader for 20 years. For 5 of those, I don't know, I was at the dark side, the light side. I'm at a VC-sponsored summit. I was a VC. And for the last 15, I've been an entrepreneur. And it can be a really lonely and difficult place. It's a really, really stressful job that we all have, but I always thought that my job as a leader was to be strong and positive and confident, and that whatever those feelings I had of doubt or overwhelm or stress, I had to keep them inside because I had to project that strength for my team. And more than that, I was so afraid for anyone in my team showing any kind of doubt or stress, like I would take on their stress because I thought we have to have a positive culture so we can be winning. Okay, winning is awesome. And so I spent so many years, including as a CEO of Happier, I look really happy. I run a company called Happier. And this added a whole other layer, but I had so much fear about ever letting anyone know how I really felt, which was often I had a lot of doubt, and often I was overwhelmed, and often I didn't know the answer. And I thought I was doing the right thing. And then I couldn't do it anymore. And this is actually, I'm getting goosebumps. I think this is the first time I've written a book. I've been in a lot of press. I think it's the first time I say this in Boston, but it was a few years ago where I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't push anymore. All these feelings I was trying to hide. Just because you hide a difficult feeling doesn't make it go anywhere. And by the way, research shows that when you acknowledge your difficult feeling, you experience it for a shorter amount of time and with less duration. So all of these feelings just started coming out. And they weren't just from running startups. They began when I came here as a refugee, but the pressure of running a startup is intense. And so I stopped being able to pretend, and I stopped being able to cover it up. And it was, good thing it's a lightning talk, because it's a longer story. It was the darkest time in my life, and I really got to a place where I was being a terrible leader and a terrible CEO. I was also being a terrible wife and a terrible mom, because by the way, our families are teams also. And it was only in that point when I, for the first time, began to realize that my emotional health as a leader was non-negotiable, and that actually I wasn't doing my team any good, because what I learned was I wasn't really being so good at pretending to be happy. Your team knows, as Tom mentioned, they know when something is wrong. But I didn't create an environment where it was okay to talk about that. There was no psychological safety. And so my team started to do things like they tried to not let me know about anything that was stressful, because they could see like one more thing was going to throw me over. And so first they stopped telling me about their personal stress. But you know what else happened? They stopped telling me when they disagreed with my product decisions. So we ended up wasting a lot of time and a lot of money that we could have avoided because people on the team had different opinions, but they didn't want to tell me because they were so afraid to upset me. And if you're sitting here and listening to me and you're like, no, that's not my team, just pause there for a minute. because most of us as leaders are trying to do the best thing, and often we actually cultivate an environment of not the opposite of psychological safety. And so the thing that I want to tell you is that you cannot be a great leader if you are suffering, if your individual culture, if your emotional health is suffering. You cannot be a great leader. You also cannot be a great leader if you're pretending. So, because first of all, you're not really that good at pretending. People around us, in our teams and in our lives, they know. And as in my story, and so many entrepreneurs in Boston, my book came out in May, and so many entrepreneurs reached out and said, oh my God, I'm going through this, but I'm so afraid to tell people. Well, so I want to leave you with this thought, with this place to start. And that is that you cannot be a great leader if you're pretending, but you can be an amazing leader if you become a little bit more honest, first with yourself, and then with your team, about how you feel, including when you don't feel great, when you're questioning a product direction, when you're not sure if you can get through a challenge, when you're just so overwhelmed and exhausted and you want to say, guys, I'm making horrible decisions right now. Help me. Because when you do that, that's when you're a great leader. That's when you're cultivating psychological safety, that environment of openness and honesty and collaboration. And by the way, the thing I discovered that we all discover, my team didn't run away. They all stepped up to help. And that's how we become great leaders. And so that's my ask of you, is can you become a little bit more honest with how you feel, with yourself and your team? Can you remember that being happy or cultivating emotional well-being is not about smiling all the time or being positive all the time. It's also about having that resilience to get through hard times and being open about it. And that resilience begins with acknowledging that you're a human being, that your team members are human beings. And as human beings, we have to learn the skill of being okay with sharing when we're not okay. And that's the kind of leadership that your team is actually looking for. And that's the kind of culture that actually will help you win. Thank you so much.